the revolutionary ankle lock system, an integrated brace built into the boots, delivering unrivaled support, protecting ligaments from twists, tears, and trauma.
Matt Lenihan for Boxing Social, in association with Empire Fight Store and Our Kings Competitions. We're here, Stephen Espinoza. It wouldn't be a big fight week without yourself. Every time I come to the States, you're involved in some capacity, but look, you're here, part of the event this week, Canelo versus Crawford. It's been sort of labelled as, the biggest fight in the past 10 years. Obviously, we know we had Mayweather-Pacquiao, which transcended the sport in terms of numbers and pay-per-views. But this is a little bit something different on Netflix, but what a fight.
It is. First of all, I love stadium fights. I've had the good fortune of being involved in a few with Errol Spence and Ugas at the Cowboy Stadium. Spence in Sheffield. Anthony. Yeah, Anthony Joshua at Wembley and Klitschko. And it's some of my favorite things. Is to be in a big stadium with that kind of atmosphere. So I know the Raiders have, and their ownership has wanted a big fight for a while. This is a great one. So I think it's got a lot of elements to really elevate the event in itself.
There's so many variables when you talk about not just the event but the actual fight itself. I think if you were talking about, and I don't say this with disrespect, probably another fighter other than a Terence Bud Crawford, it would seem maybe an 80-20 split on paper, and you go, it's maybe a bit of a Hail Mary. But with him, there's this thing of everyone he's come up against, he finds an answer. When he's, Sean's walking around, someone say too loud, he's been told you're down, the scorecards, bang, the switch goes. You look at the fighters who's been in the ring with. We saw the fight against Errol Spence, where I almost feel like because people talk about the accident, Errol, it takes away sometimes from how brilliant Terence was. I'm trying to word this correctly, but is he that guy? Could he be that guy to dethrone Canelo Alvarez at this natural weight?
He definitely has the tools. There's risk there. But to your point, the fact that there is this additional element, there's an additional element of debate. He's too small. He's not too small. He's actually got the same size frame generally as Canelo. He's got a longer reach. Has he put on too much muscle? Is he too bulky? It's a whole other like parameter or a set of parameters that are being debated here that does add to the whole thing. But if you look at his body of work, he doesn't have the big names, maybe the consistent quality that Canelo does. The triple Gs, the Mayweathers, the Beevils. But if you look at their skill set and their physical characteristics, it is tough to say that Crawford doesn't have a very good chance. I don't personally, I don't see either guy getting a stoppage. I think this is going to be a disputed decision one way or the other. But you look at Crawford, he's very cerebral. He's always in great condition. He's got a long reach. He controls distance, and he's mean.
Yeah, he is.
He's mean. So I think he's got as good a chance as anybody in any division of beating Canelo.
He is. I spoke to a few fighters. And Antonio Tarver, for instance, who's, he did it the hard way. He has some historic fights, obviously Roy Jones, and got victory over a very good Roy Jones, I think, as well. And a lot of people are saying in this fight, and people in the media, if Terence Crawford pulls this off and it's a clear win, there's no maybe controversy surrounding it, a knockout or a clear points victory, a lot of people are saying that puts him as the GOAT. 3-weight undisputed. I'm always a bit on the fence about doing it because of errors, and how do you do it? Does he go on the Mount Rushmore for this error? Is he Mount Rushmore of all time? Does it though put him in that conversation?
He deserves to be in the conversation if he does that. That is an objective statistic. It's an objective accomplishment that separates him. Now you can get into the finer points. How good was the 40-pound division? When he became, who did you beat to get it? Where does that rank up historically? But that's a question of degree, So, but should he deserve to be in the conversation? It is a fair question to ask. It's a fair debate to have.
Obviously, Netflix having a big sort of impact on the sport now, and we see them working with obviously Riyadh season and Dana White now. We've seen MVP do it. I know Jake Paul he's used it, and it's shone a lot of light on obviously himself, but it's given platforms to the likes of a Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, who, for me, Katie Taylor's possibly the greatest female fighter of all time. I know Clarissa will have something to say, and look, I'm not going to argue with her either. She's an immense talent. Serrano as well. Stick them two, whatever, them three in the order, but I probably do believe Katie is that one. Is it a good thing we're seeing these sort of, I don't want to say influence because I believe, Jay, you class him as a fighter now, but the eyeballs that it brings, the audience that Netflix brings in this day and age, we moved over to that streaming service as well. How sort of positive is this for the sport that you can sort of showcase your skills and go, look, this is me, and it's not costing maybe a lot of money anymore?
It's a fantastic thing for the sport, but to be clear, it should be one element of a bigger piece. And I think what is missing is the consistency and the regularity. Netflix's business model is do big fights occasionally. Right now it's 3 or 4 times a year, massive fights. And in the U.S. market, and to a certain degree even in the U.K., there's lacking the regular, consistent media outlets where you get your steady diet of developmental fights, mid-level fights, championship fights on a regular basis. So the question is, okay, let's say you get a huge audience and you create a bunch of new boxing fans. What's the next thing they're going to go watch? They're going to be hungry. Where do you send them to say, okay, you become a fan, this is where you go? And right now, it's sort of spotty. And I know there are platforms out there, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but in terms of having a broad, big platform where you can go for regular, high-quality fights here in the U.S., it's spotty, and that's a problem.
What is the answer to it? Because boxing, no matter what anyone says, look, it's great when you see fighters getting a big payday. I always say no fighter's overpaid. One shot can end the whole career, and sadly even worse. But where is that ground where we can get that consistent basis of fights of a decent level? I know in the UK now there's a big perception of we're not really getting any big fights. In the UK, we used to have, you go to Liverpool Echo Arena, you could get maybe a Callum Smith versus, whoever, Joshua Boatse, the one that was on the Riyadh season card, and you go, that would have filled there, that would have filled the O2. Is that sort of the flip side of when you do have these big events, the fact that, and I remember all the years people say, we overcooked certain fights, but the feeling you got when you eventually got to them fights of, in layman's terms, holy shit, this fight is here. Is it important we don't try to make it so normal? Do you know what I'm saying? To take away that spice. I don't think I think this event's bang on, but you look and you go, well, if we flip it over again, if this was on every month, you don't want every month. So it's still finding that balance.
No, it is. And again, it needs some the audience likes predictability and regularity. How do things work? How do fights happen? When do I expect them? How does the build-up go? Where do I go to follow the sport? And, right now, and again, thrilled for the fighters getting paydays, and certainly the Saudis are making fights happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened. But at the same time, the way they've gone about it has created some vacuums in the UK market, in the US market, in terms of live events, in terms of TV. I think one of the reasons why you're seeing not a lot of US media outlets stepping aggressively into the sport is because there's no certainty. If you wanted to do 6 months ago, a year ago, a deal with Top Rank, and one of the things that you want to get access to is Shakur Stevenson. He's a free agent now, but and now all of a sudden you do that deal and you expect to get Shakur, and then with one phone call, he's all of a sudden in Riyadh and Saudis, and there goes a big piece of why you did your TV deal. That goes across the board. So until the dust settles and we figure out, how everything's going to work, I don't see media coming in a regular basis because there's no certainty.
Hopefully they do find a middle ground, because like you said, boxing, it's thriving for big occasions, and I look at some of the young fighters coming through going, you've a variety of platforms now, you've an opportunity, but it's just about connecting them dots and getting it right. What are you looking forward to see over the next 12 months? There's a lot of things in the offering. I know you covered a lot of Floyd Mayweather fights in your time, and you were part of I don't want to say how many out of the top 10 in boxing history in terms of pay-per-views, but I know you had a huge involvement. What are you looking forward to in terms of potential big fights between now and the end of next year? I'm talking your Gervonta Davis. I know he's got the Jake Paul thing coming up. Obviously, a Shakur Stevenson, Dimitri Bivol, Usyk. What are you looking forward to as maybe the fan? Because obviously there's still a love for the sport there, separate from the business.
6 of the top 10, by the way. I'll say it.
I thought it was 6, but I didn't want to in case I knocked you down.
No, right. Look, I do believe, after Tank takes this little detour, that he'll be on a tour of big fights. I know he wants to finish some business with Lamont Roach, and then potential, big fights. I'm looking forward to seeing Boots Ennis at 54, and I know he's even now has struggled to get some of those big fights that he wants. There's definitely some interesting names there. And what I'm really interested in is to say, okay, we're now getting toward the phase where we need to start focusing on the next generation. And even, Boots is right now entering his peak. I'm talking about the generation younger than that. And now it's start to say, okay, let's start to sort of separate the elite guys from the non-elite guys, and that's like one of my favorite things. Like the guys who are getting buzzes, Isaac Lucero, there's the Abdullah Masons, the guys like that are getting the buzzes, and now you're finding out who's going to be those guys that are carrying the sport in the next generation.
Who excites you about this young crop? Because I look at guys like, in the UK, there's a guy by the name of Giorgio Vizioli. I know he's done a lot of rounds with a Kamel Morton. And I look at them two and go, you know what, 6 or 7 years down the line could be a great fight because there's a narrative with the sparring. You look at Ezequiel Moses for me, who's a cousin of Shakur Stevenson, and I've seen him fight live on a couple of occasions, and you go, there's things there in a few years. These guys are going to be household names.
Yeah, there's some interesting things going in the UK. Ituama, I think I think he's definitely one that to be very excited about. I mentioned Abdullah Mason. I think he's somebody. I want to see how good Shiraz is. He's definitely proven to have a good career thus far, but how far he can go. One guy who's been popular on the PBC side has been Isaac Lucero. I've also Abel Ramos.
It's good fun.
Yeah, a lot of entertaining fighters. So look, I think they're not big names, and again, we need a platform to highlight this middle class. But there's a lot of talent there.
100%. Look, it's been good chopping it up with you. You always give us your time when we're here, and look, we do it again soon on the next big fight.
All right, good to see you, bro.
The revolutionary ankle lock system, an integrated brace built into the boots, delivering unrivaled support, protecting ligaments from twists, tears, and trauma.